Hello, I'm here talking about stuff again. Let's talk about stuff. Should the camera be there or should I move it? That's fine. It's a bit... Oh my god. Oh my goodness. Okay. I don't really know what to talk about or what's going on inside of my face right now. But I feel like there's something is going on inside. Definitely. And it has to do with awakening. There is this thing. I'm sort of interested in how economic crises so basically like the perpetual sort of economic crisis of a capitalist system produces mental anguish. I'm interested in how those two poles connect, the material and the mental. It seems to me as if the stronger you get this sense that you're not materially free. See, the kind of fucked up thing, and it's what I was trying to, I think, talk about in the last video, is that you get to believe that you're living in pleasure. I think that's one of the things you get to believe. You get to believe that actually you're living not only in pleasure, but surrounded in vast amounts of pleasure. When you're not. You're not enjoying your life. You're not enjoying things. But what I mean is that I agree with the idea that there is a general sort of sense that you're enjoying the world more than you actually are, because the image that we give ourselves through the story that we tell ourselves again and again is that we're enjoying things and we have a lot of choices. And that seems to hide the fact that we don't actually have that many choices and we aren't enjoying them as much as we think. In any case, it's funny, it's weird how these two narratives sort of get joined, where on the one hand we get this image of a world in total chaos, and that's the thing that newspapers are constantly sort of reporting on. There's the sense of a total state of chaos, and at the same time, it's just so funny how we're able, really, as a culture, to perceive that chaos and basically only think about it. That's all we think about. We think about the news and about how terrible everything is, and yet to not connect it back to the economic system. It's almost as if it seems... I don't know what it is about that, but something like that's happening, where it doesn't get brought back to that issue. Instead, it gets brought back to like, identity issues and weird sort of metaphysical issues. The fact that there are trans people somehow is why the world's in a mess. The fact that there are French philosophers being taught in universities, and I don't know, it's almost a cliche at this point, but I do believe that a lot of people think that that's what's happening. That basically the reason why things are not working for so many people is because of some cultural issue, because of some idea, a set of ideas that are bad and should be contained, but instead have been liberated, like a Pandora's box of terrible ideas. And okay, so what's happening here? one thing I feel that's happening is that you you disconnect from trauma, basically, is what happens, isn't it? You disconnect from trauma. Trauma disconnects you from yourself and from your body. So in a constant state of trauma, you don't feel your body, you don't feel yourself. You're sort of a little removed from it, and you long for that removal to stop. You want it to get better. So, but you don't know what's happening because you're removed from your body. So you don't know actually what's happening. All you know is that something's bad and you don't want it to be. The problem, I guess, with capitalism is that it creates a fake discomfort. This discomfort that we're feeling is not real. Like, it shouldn't actually be happening, right? It really shouldn't be happening because there is a wealth inequality that is so that actually all of that wealth could be redistributed. So it sort of means that actually it's almost like it creates a cognitive dissonance, because you know, you can see that things are good enough that wealth could be redistributed. You know, there is wealth in the world. And yet, on the other hand, there is a belief that actually, no, that couldn't happen. We live in a complete sort of scarcity of everything. Obviously, it's almost as if in order to maintain that belief, you need to have believed really, really strongly that it must not be questioned that people can get as rich as they want, basically. If you believe that people can get as rich as they want, then you won't ever question that aspect of the equation. You will find that there's a problem in the situation, but you won't look for answers there. You will look for answers anywhere else except for that central sort of blind spot that says, oh, but don't look in the area that says people can get as rich as they want, because obviously people must have to get as rich as they want. Why? Because if you start believing that people that people can get as rich as they want, you would have to stop applying that to yourself, right? And if you apply to yourself the idea that you could eventually pull yourself out of your material discomfort and your material unfreedom, if you believe that, well, that pushes you through, right? In some weird way, that keeps you pushing forward because you think, you know, I will get out of this. And I think it's a weird kind of narrative. It's a twisted sort of narrative because it speaks to something really true about the self. The idea that you can get infinitely rich, that there really ought not to be any cap. You can be a billionaire, you can be a multi-billionaire. The idea that there is an infinite sort of possibility for richness is a religious ideal, is the idea that the self can enrich itself eternally. It can tap into a source of wealth that it can drink from unboundedly, and it can just drink for it in a way that connects it with eternity. It can drink from this wealth. And that is true. That is true. So we don't want to refuse that truth. I think there's a part of us that's like, well, that's got to be true. So obviously we have to accept that truth. So we can't, that truth speaks to something true about the self, about just the pure sort of self existing in the present moment. There's something about the pure self in the present moment that is sort of eternal, unbound by any categories that we may give to it. And I feel like we feel that. And so we refuse to give up this idea. The problem is that the idea that we are refusing to give up is like the mundane counterpart to that idea. The idea that you can get rich with actual material wealth eternally. Why do we need this material counterpart to the idea that you're already eternally spiritually rich? Well, because the idea that you're eternally spiritually rich doesn't exist. It's been like forgotten, basically. It's been forgotten. It's been hidden. It hasn't been hidden by any person. It's just been hidden by trauma. Again, why? Because trauma distances you from yourself. If you are connected to yourself, you see this really obviously. You don't need to be atheist or theist, or you don't have to have any specific religious faith. It's just the sense that if you're connected to yourself in some way, if you're not traumatized, you feel the wealth of living. You feel the beauty of life. You feel the wealth of being in connection with other things and other people, and you feel it eternally because you feel it unbound from any sort of limitations of time. You don't feel as if time has anything to say about your well-being, your beauty, Fear of death, fear of change stops being something that can affect you, that can impede you from enjoying life and loving life. But that doesn't happen if you're traumatized, because if you're traumatized, yourself is far away. And I feel that trauma does come from a certain degree of material unfreedom. If you're materially unfree, that's a sort of trauma, in a way. It means, well, that's how trauma is often defined, is you not being free to do, in the material world, to do what you want to do. Meaning, you're having to do something that you don't want to do, or you're having to not do something that you would like to do. So that state of trauma increases this sort of mental anguish. Material trauma increases this distance from the self, and a distance from the self, right? So that's the whole thing, I think. It reduces your ability to perceive the truth of the self, the fact that the self exists, it's real, and it's wealthy, it's eternally wealthy. That is to say, just existing is already eternally wealthy. A lot of the things that you want from life, a lot of the things that you want to enjoy from life, from relating to life, from relating to other beings around you, is already here. It's already here right now. It's a part of reality, with no sort of limitations. So that a lot of the things that you're looking for out in the world, you already have them. And if you were to believe that, then it would be necessary to have, it wouldn't be necessary to consider illegal the idea of thinking that perhaps billionaires shouldn't even exist on this planet, right? If you were to allow yourself to think that, then suddenly the whole system starts to be I don't know what it starts to be, but it just stops working. So the system depends in some way on this anxiety that's produced by the distancing from the self, that then prevents you from from seeing that there already is a self right now that's already 100% there. Otherwise, because I think that's the thing, this connection with the self is what we want, the most. It's what we want the most, especially in moments of trauma. And that's why the whole issue with like identity, I think, is so big now, with trauma of material circumstances increasing, right? People want the identity is a symptom, I think, of the increased lack of identity, lack of self that material lack produces. The worse things get, the more we want a connection with the self. The more distant from the self we get, the more we want a connection from the self. It's almost like the thirstier you get, the more you desire water. With this sort of added strange complexity that it's almost as if we're so thirsty that we're delusional. It's like we're so thirsty that we're like hallucinating that we're somewhere else, and that there's water all around us. It's almost like the typical, it's like the typical cartoon of someone who's so thirsty that they start imagining that they're in the middle of a fresh, clear water river. You know what I mean? If you start imagining that you're in a fresh river, then why would you think you're thirsty? You know, there's water all around me. So clearly water, the lack of water can't be the problem, I tell myself, you know? So this feeling I'm feeling, which actually is thirst, what is it? Do you see what I mean? Like, if you're inside a delusional kind of world that's surrounded with water, then this terrible thirst you're feeling, you will just think, well, I don't know, it must be something else. It must be that I'm feeling sad, maybe it's I'm feeling afraid. In fact, it's interesting, I was just watching videos about this recently. Apparently, trauma, people who have survived a lot of trauma, apparently a common trait is to feel like you can't recognize your body's own calls for rest and for refilling, so that maybe you're really tired, but you respond to that by thinking that it's some other bad feeling. It's a bad feeling of tiredness, but maybe like, oh, I'm feeling depressed, you know? I should like watch a funny video or something. I should engage in life in some other way. And actually it's or maybe I should try and do things. I should go out with my friends. I should, but maybe it's your body calling out for like sleep, or like just calm down, like take some time, do something for yourself, you know. But doing something for yourself is difficult to see if you don't even see that there is any problem with yourself. That's the thing. That's the distance from the self, I think. That you and I believe that we're all traumatized, right? All of us, we're traumatized in this way, because we're all living in a social situation that prevents us from doing things we want and forces us to do things we don't want, basically. So we're constantly in a state of trauma. And so I think that we're constantly feeling like we want our self. We want to be, we just want to be. But we can't allow ourselves to just be, because we don't even believe that that's the problem. You know, we think it must be anything else except the self. Because look at all this water. We're surrounded with water. It can't possibly be the self. Why would I be thirsty? If I have all this self around me. But no, it's it's the self. And so we need to find weird, like, spiritual reasons for why things are going the way they are. We say, oh, well, the world is going to shit. Why? Oh, it must be because of some sort of deep, dark, corrosive force, a strange, unconscious force that we can't see that's sucking out the power from the world, a terrible force that permeates everything, like, trans ideas or strange, evil ideas that go into the heart of our culture and, like, rot it from the inside. Obviously, we need to think of these things as evil hidden entities, because otherwise we would tell ourselves that we are able to see what's happening, but we can't see what's happening. So it has to be some sort of hidden. We see effects all around us. We see strange coincidences, strange patterns, synchronicities, and we think, something's behind these synchronicities. But it's hidden. And the thing that's hidden is capitalism. It's the fact that there are billionaires on this planet. It's the fact that there is even the possibility of making money from other people's money. The fact that it's even possible to accumulate wealth to such a degree that goods that are required to live are privately owned by just a few people. Like the fact that things that millions of people need is not publicly shared, or at least made more available, just at least not on a trajectory of exponential growth towards capitalism, not on a trajectory towards exponentially going in that direction, But so it's funny because I think this accounts for several things, which is that the worse things get, like the worse capitalism squeezes the world, the more the mental anguish increases, and at the same time, the more distant we are from our delusion. Like, it's like we're squeezed, and simultaneously this, like, it makes us more delusional, so we're more distant from what's actually happening, and therefore less able to sacrifice the idea of an eternal wealth making. Because the more distant from the self you are, the more you crave the self, the thirstier you are. And the thirstier you are, you're like, well, I'm not going to give up this idea that I could potentially get out of this hole. Because if I give up that idea, that I can potentially make myself rich again, then I'm dead, without realizing that that's precisely the idea that's maintaining this system alive, basically, is thinking that somehow you can only connect to yourself through money. And, of course, that the only way that we can connect to ourselves really is by being in a situation that's materially just, that's materially free for everyone, and that can't be maintained as long as there are billionaires, basically. So yeah, the more distance from yourself you get, the more difficult this is. And then the more scapegoaty you get, the more you feel like it has to be something, the solution has to be something except the whole getting eternally rich thing. The whole getting eternally rich thing needs to stay there because it's the foundation for who you are, right? Yourself, we've sort of associated completely with this idea that it needs to allow for eternal richness. So the scapegoating gets intense. and you start blaming all sorts of other people and all sorts of other things for weird sort of reasons that have nothing to do with the problem at hand. And so it creates these sort of counterintuitive effects where we sometimes think of like we think of like progress in this weird way as if like if you gain rights for people, they have sort of molded the world for the better almost eternally, right? History has sort of moved forward, and we've slowly sort of etched a space for freedom for people, slowly, you know, and then this, it can only be undone by people. That's what we tell ourselves. It can only be undone by like evil people. Evil people will get into government and they will backtrack all of this. But it gets undone because it is these freedoms are being like they are gotten by the system itself, and so the system is what squeezes them, and the system is what squeezes them and makes them worse, because by squeezing the people it creates these sort of situations of fear where suddenly like trans people are scary, you know, black people are scary, women, feminists are scary. Like all this stuff starts to happen where it creates these increases in the feeling that these things are the problems to our world. And it creates them again, as a system. So it doesn't even need specific people to get into government and do things. Like it's already squeezing the soul in such a way that it produces this sort of desire to scapegoat people. Because you either scapegoat people or you stop believing that being eternally rich is good. Because the problems around you are so obviously caused by a lack of richness that you have to work pretty hard. The psyche needs to work hard. The traumatized psyche needs to work pretty hard to maintain the illusion that obviously if you're thirsty, it's because you want water. You know what I mean? Like that the problem is an issue of economic instability. So yeah, and it's almost as if I feel as if maybe there's sort of weird relationship to the psyche here, where trauma gets more intense and trauma creates even more scapegoats. Anxiety creates even more reasons for its suffering. Like maybe you're anxious because you need to go to a social event you're scared of. But then the more anxious you get, social events aren't the only thing you get anxious about. Then you get anxious about getting out of bed. And then maybe you get anxious about the fact that maybe the water is contaminated. And then like it's almost as if trauma just breeds more trauma. Trauma breeds more trauma. What's happening now has a lot to do with mental health at that level, mental health at the level of the spiritual, not just at the level of the purely like pathologically sick, but at the level of the like clearly the symbolic is at play here, right? the evil foreigner that's considered like the evil cause of suffering is always like, it's like a desire to awaken to the unconscious realities, right? It's like a desire to be, oh, right, okay, so it's like we're getting a sense that, yes, there are dark forces operating. It's just that they are, the unconscious. They are God. They are the divine. And if you are committed to believing that the self can only be maintained through money, then any proof that enters into your life that suggests that, actually, maybe the self exists independent from money and is eternally rich in ways that I hadn't ever contemplated, that's a scary idea, because it suggests suddenly that you don't need to be living in this kind of poverty, or that you don't need to be living in this kind of state. And it's a sort of like being pulled back into your body and facing the trauma kind of moment, right? Yeah, that's the point, I guess, is that trauma distance yourself from your body, because if it was distant from your body, if it weren't distant from your body, you would be perceiving the trauma. You would be perceiving the thing that's like hard to perceive. So it's like, if that happened now, we would suddenly see and mourn everything that we've lost, mourn all the lost opportunities, the things that you didn't get to do because you weren't materially free to do them, the things that you were forced to do and that you didn't want to do because you weren't materially free to avoid doing them. There's a big process of grief and mourning here that requires you to go back into your body. It requires you to sort of feel it, to feel the trauma, to go back and feel it. And feeling it is so painful that all sorts of things are done to prevent that from happening. Like giving material explanations for any kind of inner psychological process that's taking place. So again, if you're getting the sense that, I'm surrounded by dark forces that are connecting me to everything and everything's sort of connected, if you were to suddenly be aware that that's true at the spiritual domain, then you would need all these projected scapegoat people. Right? The scapegoat people are anchors for you to say, yes, I'm getting a very strong sense that there are weird connected forces in the world, but I'm going to justify those forces as much as I can in a material way. Look, it's these people. It's those people. They're connecting together. They're doing these things. They're entering my country. They're doing this stuff. They're entering into this place. They're infiltrating this other place, and they're fucking things up. And if you're able to like project, sort of place a material husk onto the spiritual domain, you can pretend for long enough that the spiritual domain doesn't exist. You can be like, oh no, this isn't my inner world. These aren't inner demons. These aren't inner dark forces and processes that connect me up with the world. No, look, it's actual dark forces. Look at them. They're out here in the world. And it sort of helps you to alleviate that that fear that it might be true. Like, oh no, okay, good. Oof. It's not a spiritual process. It's not an inner divine process. No, look, it's all this actual people. So that's the thing. If those people suddenly stopped working and the projection flooded out in some way, and you really like confronted it and were forced to confront it as the self, 100%, that would confront you with trauma. And it would confront you with really difficult things to confront. I don't know. That's something I wanted to say. I don't know really what it means, or if it means anything, but yeah. Okay.